Welcome to a special episode of Shujin Academy VGM Club. I'm Professor Tom, your faculty sponsor. The song you just heard was the opening theme for Final Fantasy on the NES. In June, all your favorite VGM podcasts are doing a series called Masters of VGM, where we do episodes devoted to our 4 favorite video game composers. I'm jumping on this bandwagon, and I'm going to do at least 3 episodes for this series, maybe 4, maybe even more, depending on the track lists and how many songs I have to fit in. For this first one, I'm going to highlight songs from my favorite VGM composer, Nobuo Uematsu. If you're a fan of the show, this is not a surprise selection. I've played more of Uematsu's songs than any other single composer, even if you don't count episode 3, which was devoted entirely to his work outside of the Final Fantasy series. A lot of VGM podcasters, myself included, will intentionally try to play lesser-known songs so that listeners can experience new tracks that they haven't heard before. For these Masters of VGM episodes, I'm intentionally going to lean the other way. I intend for these episodes to feel like greatest hits compilations, or at least mostly like greatest hits compilations. I still may stick in some lesser-known stuff that warrants attention. When I think of Uematsu's work, I think of Final Fantasy. He was the series' sole composer for every main series game in the NES, Super NES, and PlayStation era. Keeping with the greatest hits theme of this episode, I'm going to play one song from every main series FF game that Uematsu has worked on. We'll start by playing one track from each of the first 6 Final Fantasy games. Every one of these games has been ported and remade several times, but I'm going to stick to the original versions of each songs. And to choose these tracks, I just listed off each game in my head and picked the first awesome song I could think of. For Final Fantasy I, that's Matoya's Cave. This song comes from a cave where a blind witch lives with a helpful animated broom that teaches you a magic spell. If you like this, you should check out the version of the song from the PS1 port of Final Fantasy, and you should also check out the version of the song performed by Uematsu's rock band, the Black Mages. I'll link them in the show notes. For our representative from Final Fantasy II, I'll play Finale. As you may have guessed from the title, this is the end theme from the game. There's a wonderful rearrangement of this song from the Love Will Grow Arrange album that I'll link to in the show notes. The song I'm choosing from Final Fantasy III is Cute Little Tozas. I could have used a more serious track here, but I wanted to go with something a little more playful. This track is an example of the sense of whimsy that early Final Fantasy games show off in a lot of different ways. I think the series has gotten away from that a lot, and in my book, or at least on my show, something has been lost. There's a fun vocal arrangement of this song on the Love Will Grow Arranged album that I'll also link to in the show notes. This song shows off Uematsu's versatility as a composer. He could even use the limited Famicom sound hardware to still evoke a wide variety of moods. I'm actually going to play 2 songs from Final Fantasy IV, Into the Darkness, and also Illusionary World. This is cheating because it's 2 songs, and I said I'd only play 1 per game, but it's my podcast, and I make the rules, and the first rule is that making a good show is the only thing that matters. All the other rules are subservient to that one. Both of these are just beautiful dungeon songs. The most obvious choice for Final Fantasy V is Battle on the Big Bridge, so that's what I'm going with. This song is great. It's one of those tracks that rocks so hard it'll just melt your face off. As you may have guessed from the title, it's used in the game during an epic battle on a big bridge. Uematsu's band The Black Mages did an arrangement of this song, and that version will be linked in the show notes as well. For Final Fantasy VI, I'm going with Devil's Lab. 6 is my absolute favorite game in the FF series, and most days it's my favorite video game of all time. This is my favorite song on the soundtrack. It's the theme for a dungeon that's a laboratory where the villains have been doing gruesome experiments on some magical creatures to harness their powers. There's plenty of competition for good songs on this soundtrack, though. The opera and the final boss theme are both really popular songs from this, and they'd be good choices, except I think I like Devil's Lab a bit more. Also, Devil's Lab clocks in at a very reasonable 2 minutes 34 seconds, as opposed to over 12 minutes for the opera and 17 minutes plus for the final boss theme. If I played those two songs, it would basically be the whole show. It's actually funny because this is the first time I've played a song from Final Fantasy VI on the podcast. Before I started the show, if you told me it would take 13 episodes to play a song from this game, I would have been really surprised. Here's the music. Enjoy! And now for a word from our sponsor.
When you wake up in the morning, are you a zombie?
Have a Revivify. Revivify is the energy drink that'll transform you from a zombie into a regular person and get you going again. Find Revivify at a convenience store near you. And now, back to the show. In the mid-90s, it was a huge shock to the gaming world when Squaresoft announced that they were going to stop creating games for Nintendo's platforms and move their franchise titles to the Sony PlayStation instead. Uematsu rolled with the change and the improved sound capabilities of the PlayStation and kept turning in amazing soundtracks. I'll play one song from each of the PlayStation-era Final Fantasy games, and then I'll follow that up with some songs from the more modern era of the franchise. I'm doing a greatest hits theme for this episode, which means I have to play One Winged Angel as my song from Final Fantasy VII. If there is a single song from this soundtrack that people know, it's this absolutely epic theme that plays during the game's final confrontation with Sephiroth, who's transformed into a creature that's half man, half biblically accurate angel. Man with the Machine Gun is my choice for a Final Fantasy VIII song. If you're not familiar with the game, there are a series of flashback sequences where the narrative jumps backwards in time and you control a different set of characters from the main party. This song is the combat theme song for the alternate party, and it's a great random encounter song. I considered playing Maybe I'm a Lion, the game's end-boss fight song, but I'm saving that one for a later episode. Final Fantasy IX is a giant love letter to the series, particularly the NES and SNES games. Artist Yoshitaka Amano returned to do the character designs, as he'd done for the first 6 games. There are lots of little Easter eggs and characters that are references to the early games in the series, although a lot of them were mangled in the original English translation. It's also the last game in the series where Uematsu composed the entirety of the soundtrack. I'm going to break the rules again and play 2 songs from this game. The first one is Secret Library Daguerreo, which is the song for a location you visit late in the game, and the second is Vamo, alla Flamenco, which is a Spanish-flavored track that plays during the Chocobo Hot and Cold minigame. I wanted to be sure to include this particular track because it shows off how much versatility that Uematsu has as a composer. Final Fantasy X marked the first game in the series for the PlayStation 2. Uematsu worked on this soundtrack along with Junya Nakano and Musashi Hamauzu, and then he took a step away from Square and began doing freelance work. Once again, I'm breaking my own rule and playing 2 songs from this game, Zanarkind and also Prelude. Zanarkind is the song from the game's opening, and it also plays during an absolute low point for the characters in the game's storyline. I love its sad piano feel. Also, every Final Fantasy game has a version of Prelude, and this particular one is one of the most interesting rearrangements. It's upbeat rather than reverent and sad. Uematsu also contributed several songs to the series' MMO entries, Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV. I have a rule that says I'm not allowed to play MMOs for the sake of my marriage, so I haven't spent much time with either game, but I did check out the soundtracks as part of research for these episodes, and they're really good. I'll play Ronfaure from Final Fantasy XI and Contention from Final Fantasy XIV. Here's the music. For the last music segment, I'm going to play some songs from Uematsu's games that aren't Final Fantasy, and while I did already do an entire episode devoted to that topic, none of these 3 songs got played on that episode. Uematsu's first credited game, as composer, is Cruise Chaser Blassty. It's a game from the early days of Square. It came out in 1986 for the PC-88, before the company shifted its focus to home consoles. And while the PC-88 does have a bit of a reputation for adult games, and Blassty is spelled B-L-A-S-S-T-Y, it's actually a PG-rated title about a group of pilots and a mech exploring a maze in first-person perspective. I don't believe it's ever received a release in English, and it's more of a historical curiosity than a lost classic. The soundtrack does have a couple of worthwhile songs, though. I'll be playing the main theme for you. I'll also play Here Comes Conga Boy from Uematsu's album of original compositions titled 10 Short Stories. This is a very whimsical album that really shows off his ability as a composer to be playful and fun, and if you can find it, you should check it out. Vocals for this track are from a singer named Chico. I could play any song from this album to show off Uematsu's sense of whimsy, but I chose Conga Boy because it's the album opener, and it does a great job of setting the stage for the album as a whole. Finally, I'm going to play the main theme from Fantasian, an iOS-exclusive game that came from original Final Fantasy producer Hironobu Sakaguchi. Uematsu has stated that this is probably his last soundtrack, and it's absolutely beautiful. If it is his last major work, it's a fitting capstone to his career. Enjoy the songs.
たんです。はい、抜かった綱取り目指してどつかいちゃんこも食べて気合を十分単語ボーイもやってきた単語ガールを引き連れて手と手組みステップ踏んで踊り出すオラuno dos tres cuatro uno dos tres cuatro uno dos tres cuatro 1 2 3 uno dos tres cuatro uno dos tres cuatro muchachoにmuchachaチャチャチャも踊るリンゴボーイもやってきた大きな箱にリンゴ詰め声も高らか甘いリンゴはいらんかね甘いよこいつは赤いよとでもどこでも売ってるものじゃない一口かじればほっぺが落ちるよ白雪今も毒味はいらないそうかい本当に毒味はいらないかい無人のボーイズ集まったコンガボーイもやってきたボーボーイもやってきたそうトンガボーイもやってきたリンゴボーイもやってきた単語あるもやってきた単語しながらやってきたそんなボーイズ集まった朝も早くから大騒ぎみんな楽しきゃそれが一番そうでしょう
はい。
赤い
That's the show. If you want to reach me, you can email me at shujinacademyvgmclub@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at shujinvgmclub and on Instagram at shujinacademyvgmclub. Please leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're finding this episode. If you liked this episode, you should also check out episode 3 of my show, called Before and Outside of Final. It's all about Nobuo Uematsu songs that were not for Final Fantasy games. Special thanks to everyone who set up the Masters of VGM project and all the other podcasters who are participating. You can follow the project's Twitter account at Masters of VGM or visit our website at mastersofvgm.com to see all the participating podcasters and episodes released to date. I'm going to play us out with Chocobos from Final Fantasy III. I couldn't get through this episode in good conscience without at least one example of the Chocobo theme, since it's such a staple of the Final Fantasy series. Thanks for listening. I'm Professor Tom, and I'll see you next time on Shujin Academy VGM Club.